November 9th, 1938. It's an historic date that changed our world. It is a date that represents the start of one of the most tragic and evil chapters in modern history. It is a date that every year, millions of people of Jewish faith, as well as different faiths and different races, come together and pay tribute to memorialize and reflect upon. November 9th. It's a date that we must pause and remember the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, the beginning of the Holocaust. I'm Regine Schlesinger, and I'm standing in the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Skokie, Illinois. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors whose parents were rescued by Oskar Schindler. This museum holds special meaning for my family. As a reporter for WBBM News Radio in Chicago for more than 40 years, I've covered virtually every type of story. But the inhumanity and horrors of Kristallnacht still resonate as strongly today as when they occurred more than 3/4 of a century ago. The history behind Kristallnacht is a complicated one, and over the next hour, I'll do my best to tell the story. To help, it's also my honor to share with you highlights from a most distinguished and diverse group of speakers who came together on the anniversary of Kristallnacht. They gathered to reflect on this tragic event and to offer their own unique perspectives, yet they all came together with a common cause: to remember.
Each year, when we remember the night of shattered glass, Kristallnacht, our conscience is awoken of however many years ago these terrible events that have come to be known as Kristallnacht, as the turning point in the chronology and the sequence of the Holocaust, occurred during those terrible hours. And we are called to pause and remember.
Rabbis love to tell stories, and so I'm going to tell a very brief story before our program begins. And this story is about a group of students who gathered together years ago to talk about how to confront the problem of darkness. One student said, when confronted with darkness, let's take a bat and let's try to beat the darkness, and in that way we'll scare it away. The second student said, no, let's scream at the darkness, and if we just yell loud enough, the darkness will be scared into oblivion. And then the third student said, let us meet the darkness with light. And if the darkness is confronted with bright light, it will have no choice but to recede. So I think of that story this evening as we confront some very dark times in our people's history and our world's history, that perhaps the best thing that we can do is to confront that darkness with the light of education and the light of tolerance and the light of community.
The lesson I'd like to start with is this. I think one of the many tragedies of Kristallnacht is that it does not often appear in a lot of our history curriculum today, K through 12, universities. It's oftentimes not found in our history textbooks, our international relations textbooks, even books on World War II. Why? I think on one hand, the absolute magnitude, the sheer magnitude of the horror and terror of the Holocaust are so large that many very important aspects of the larger Holocaust have been lost in the sheer magnitude of it. But what's more troubling, I think, and more tragic, is oftentimes when Kristallnacht is taught, it's presented often as a spontaneous outburst by some Nazi thugs, when it was anything but that. Case in point, from the time Hitler came to power in 33 through 38, there were a series of vicious measures designed to isolate and disenfranchise Germany's Jewish population, the most notable of them being the 1935 Nuremberg laws. These various measures did things such as set up boycotts of Jewish businesses. German businesses would not service Jewish customers or clients. Jews were not permitted the full rights of citizenship in Germany. Jews could not serve in the civil service. Property was confiscated. There were laws prohibiting marriage between Jews and quote-unquote Aryans. Extramarital relationships between the two groups were criminalized. But yet, during that period from 33 to 38, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, was not happy. He wanted something more. He wanted something worse. What he was unhappy about is largely from 33 to 38, despite how vicious these policies were, they were largely nonviolent. He wanted violence. I would like to read an excerpt of the High Nazi Command, the orders that were given through the Gestapo on the evening of November 9th to show that it was not a spontaneous outburst. These are the direct orders delivered that night around 11 p.m. Number one, quote unquote, action against Jews, especially against their synagogues, will take place throughout the Reich shortly. They are not to be interfered with. Number two, so far as important archival material exists in synagogues, this is to be confiscated by immediate measures. Number three, preparations are to be made for the arrest of about 20,000 to 30,000 Jews in the Reich. Above all, well-to-do Jews are to be selected. Detailed instructions with what to do with them will follow through the weekend. We know that roughly 30,000 folks were shipped to Dachau, Buchenwald, and elsewhere. Number four, should Jews in possession of weapons be encountered in the course of this action, the sharpest measures are to be taken. And the list goes on and on and ends with clear instructions not to harm any German property and for the police and the fire departments to stand down while this occurs. On November 12th, after Kristallnacht, Erwin Goering called a meeting with Goebbels and senior Nazi officials to decide what the next step was. They decided the next step would be to make Jews responsible for Kristallnacht, to make the Jews remaining in Germany pay a fee, a heavy fee to pay for the cleanup, to use the insurance money owed Jewish businesses and Jewish merchants would be confiscated and turned over to Nazi coffers. It was a unanimous vote that evening to move forward. And here's the closing remark from the Luftwaffe commander, Erwin Goering, on November 12, 1938. I shall close the meeting with these words: German Jewry shall, as punishment for their abominable crimes and so forth, have to make a contribution of 1 billion marks to us. That will work. These swine won't commit another murder. Incidentally, gentlemen, I would like to say that I would not like to be a Jew in Germany.
Hatred isn't something any of us is born with. It's an illness embedded in weak people who fear their own lack of being, their own self-worth. Hatred is an evil that is taught and used to brainwash the ignorant. Beginning on the evening of November 9th, 1938, and continuing into the next day, Nazis took their hatred toward the Jewish people across Germany and Austria, systematically torching synagogues, vandalizing Jewish homes, and destroying schools and businesses. And in the aftermath of this incident, known as Kristallnacht, some 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. In all, more than 1,000 synagogues were burned, 7,000 Jewish-owned businesses were damaged or destroyed, and Jewish homes, schools, and institutions were ransacked and looted. These numbers, unfortunately, hardly tell the story. In Vienna alone, 94 synagogues and Jewish houses of worship either were damaged or destroyed, burned in full view of the fire departments and the public that stood by idly.
We're here this evening as a community commemorating a tragic milestone. Kristallnacht sent a message across Europe that war was being waged on the Jews. No one was safe, and all lived in fear. Kristallnacht should have been a moment that the world stood up, stood to attention, and confronted the horrors that were being and would be perpetrated by the Nazis and their allies. Many saw, but many did not, and many, too many, hesitated. It would be 7 more years before the full horror of the Nazi killing machine was appreciated, and we first uttered the words, "Never again." We defeated the Nazis and the Allies in World War II, but the hatred that inspired Kristallnacht is still alive today. Today, the Jews in places around the world face the threat of discrimination and hatred. These forces of evil are no different fundamentally than those that perpetrated the acts of terror 75 years ago tonight. The modern face of anti-Semitism is harder to define and harder to identify. There's no single organization operating under a unified banner. But the lessons of Kristallnacht are still tragically relevant today. Not just about anti-Semitism, but hate in general, hate ripping the very fabric of nations. My friends, the hate and evil that inspired Kristallnacht is still alive today, and we simply cannot accept its existence. That is the lesson of Kristallnacht. That is the lesson of the Holocaust. That is the lesson we must all apply today across the world. And that is the modern relevance of this anniversary. Never again is now.
Never again is now. But how was it that in 1938, such inhumane acts could be allowed to happen? When we look back and review history, we know that before Kristallnacht and prior to the Nazi Party coming to power, the German Jewish people lived productive lives and were held in high esteem for their considerable contributions to the fatherland. Whether as artists, scholars, scientists, physicians, medical researchers, mathematicians, industrialists, economists, musicians, and entertainers, hundreds were recognized for the successes they achieved in all fields. Notable individuals such as Albert Einstein, Heinrich Heine, Henry Kissinger, and Sigmund Freud, to name just a few, spent much of their lives as loyal citizens of Germany and Austria. Even during World War I, more than 12,000 German and Austrian Jewish citizens gave their lives on behalf of Deutschland. Things began to change, however, following Germany's loss in the war, and Germany's situation worsened exponentially in the Great Depression. Many fringe groups began to surface, each with its own brand of nationalism and espousing its own solutions for Germany's real and imagined troubles. Soon after Hitler wrested the position as Germany's chancellor in January 1933, he began instituting policies that isolated German Jews and political dissidents and subjected them to persecution. Among other things, Hitler's Nazi Party, which espoused extreme German nationalism and anti-Semitism, commanded that all Jewish businesses were to be boycotted and that all Jews be dismissed from civil service posts. From 1933 until the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, over 400 decrees and regulations restricted all aspects of public and private lives of German Jews. This legislation was not unique to Germany. After annexing Austria with popular support, the Germans quickly codified legislative anti-Semitism in Austria. When all was said and done, hundreds of bureaucrats at all levels of municipal, state, regional, and national government throughout Germany were involved in the persecution of Jews as they enacted and enforced anti-Jewish laws. Germany's treatment of the Jews under Nazi control led to a worldwide refugee crisis. As conditions for the Jews worsened, country after country, including the United States, refused to alter immigration quotas to allow Germany's Jews to escape. With the exception of the Dominican Republic, no country, including the United States and England, agree to alter quotas to allow Jewish refugees to enter. Despite the repressive nature of these policies, until 1938, the persecution of Jewish people was primarily nonviolent. However, on the night of November 9th, all of that changed dramatically.
The violence and destruction the Nazis perpetrated on Jewish people and institutions during Kristallnacht signaled a turning point in the Nazi regime's ongoing policy of exclusionary legislation and ostracizing German and Austrian Jews. This is one of the important reasons we come together tonight, to remember that acts of cruelty and violence can eventually lead to the unspeakable, the horrors of mass persecution. We must come together tonight to remember these tragic events and also commit to learning their lessons. First, never again to the persecution of Jewish people. Also, never again to the persecution of any religious minority. Unfortunately, we still witness similar acts of terror being used around the world. They are used by governments hoping to stamp out people who do not agree with them. They are used by organizations whose power relies on keeping other people oppressed. But they are also used right here in the United States, sometimes by children in schools, sometimes by adults in workplaces. And when we ignore or we tolerate bullying or hate crimes, we risk greater persecution by putting liberty and justice at risk for all of us. So I am very proud that we stand together tonight as people of different faiths and different races in recognition of our common humanity. We will always mourn and remember the millions of innocent lives that were lost during the Holocaust, and we are committed to doing all that we can to ensure that it never happens again.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone.
Now, I'd like to ask your favors here. If anybody is here who's a World War II veteran, I know if you can't stand up, just salute at your seat, but please do stand up. In fact, any veteran from any conflict, please stand up now and be recognized. This whole event is very humbling. It must be. Kristallnacht, broken glass, broken hearts, broken dreams. But there's something that doesn't break. The diamond, meaning indestructible, eternal, like us Jews. Shehekiyanu Vikigimanu Vikigiyanu Lazman Hazeh. How fortunate are we to be part of those kept alive by Hashem from the ashes, from the crematoria, from the gas chambers, to bear witness to history and to our children's children and teach our children's children. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing us, your people, Israel, to rise from the ashes above the shambles of European Jewry. And thank you, God, for the veterans who helped make that possible.
November 9 has for Germany and for Germans different meanings. It marked in 1918 the end of World War I, the proclamation of the Weimar Republic, and its very difficult beginning. In 1989, it was the day of the fall of the Berlin Wall, a joyful event that was at the origin of democratic reforms in Eastern European countries and changed the course of history. But November 9, 1938 is a very mournful occasion that fills Germans with sadness and shame. This day has been, is, and will always be a day to contemplate, to remember, and to learn from the painful past. I'm humbled and honored, ladies and gentlemen, to join in this commemoration together with you, the Jewish American community here in the Beit Hillel congregation. And I take it as a sign of hope and as an expression of trust into my country. Today, 75 years later, Germans all over the world remember the unspeakable suffering that was brought on Europe, the world, and especially on the Jewish people. We remember and grieve for the victims and honor the few survivors. What lessons have we learned from the pogrom of November 9? Kristallnacht has a vital relevance for us today, especially in Germany. It is not only about remembrance and commemoration, but also about education. Education is key to grasping what happened and why it must never happen ever again. It has therefore become an integral part of German school curriculum to teach our children about this darkest part of German history and to introduce them to Jewish life and customs. That is also why it's so important that we have places like Yad Vashem, the US Holocaust Museum, the Holocaust Memorial located at the heart of Berlin, and the nearby Illinois Holocaust Museum. Thank you for having organized this moving commemoration.
Another of the distinguished guests who took the podium was Sister Rosemary Connolly, the executive director of Misericordia Home in Chicago. Sister Connolly brought a very special perspective to the evening.
I'm a Catholic Sister of Mercy, and I have been involved with working and serving and sharing life for 44 years with children and adults who are mentally and physically challenged. We really have a beautiful Misericordia family, and we're proud to say that we have and we share life with 50 families that are Jewish at Misericordia. Thinking about tonight, I really thought very seriously how terrible it is when people are regarded as so insignificant that they can be victimized the way the Jewish people were. But before the Jewish people were victimized, the Nazis really took the mentally ill, the developmentally disabled, anyone who didn't fit in to their idea of the master race and began killing them and persecuting them, and there wasn't a general outcry. Why would this be done? Many of them were used to perfect the gas chambers that were going to be used to murder millions of Jewish people. But I've often thought, why wasn't there a terrible reaction when people with disabilities and illnesses were put in such positions of being regarded as disposable? We have to be careful of that in our country. Please God, for years people with disabilities have been treated as objects of pity, objects of ridicule, objects of condescension. And today there's a growing reality that people with disabilities have a lot to bring to our community, and thank God they're appreciating it. And sometimes we really forget how closely Christianity is to Judaism. And I'm proud to say that when I see the people on Devon Avenue walking to their synagogue every Saturday with their families, I am so proud of the witness that they are giving to our society, that how much they believe in their God and they're willing to publicly show it. So thank God for all the Jewish people who are so close to God and carry on this beautiful tradition. Thank you.
I'd like to ask each of the gentlemen to just offer a brief word on what they believe to be the relevance in terms of the lessons of Kristallnacht today with regard to anti-Semitic violence, intolerance here at home and around the world. Rabbi, if you could please start.
Well, the whole question, of course, as to how the future of the Jewish people could be, shall we say, guaranteed or safe, is a question that has many answers, but I have one in particular, and I think it was demonstrated here tonight. Among the people that spoke most movingly about the meaning of this evening and its impact on not only us, but the rest of the world, were two clergymen and a sister. I've often felt that had there been in Germany any kind of a possibility of the religious leaders of the time to be in contact with each other, and not only with each other, but also with the rabbis of the time, that maybe through them an atmosphere could have been created in Germany too, which would have prevented the outbreak of the worst of the terrible things that have happened there. I am completely convinced, and I've devoted my life to a great extent to this kind of problem, that we, who are the religious leaders of a given community, need to be in concert with each other, need to trust each other, need to know each other, need to talk about our various religious commitments in such a way that we would help create an atmosphere in which the good and the true and the honest and the sensitive and the peaceful would be stressed, and all the other aspects which often mar the religious life of every religious community would be at a minimum, if it not altogether, be repressed. So I would think that what is happening, for instance, here in Chicago, where people of various faiths come together regularly to discuss the issues of the day in an attempt to show to each other that they are all committed to the same ultimate great values and devoted to their effective teaching and their effective work in their communities, that is the best that I know of that will help Jews, help me, help all of us to have a future in which what happened in Germany in the 30s and thereafter could never be repeated.
Interfaith dialogue. An interfaith trialogue among the three great monotheistic faiths. Yes, Mr. Franks.
This is a very difficult question for an individual to answer, even an individual that has had some unforgettable experiences. I think the number of people present here tonight are evidence that Jewish people are becoming more and more aware of what really happened. And I'd like to thank Al Gruen, I don't know where he is now, for organizing this. I think it's very important that as Jews, we become aware of what our own history is and try to do something about problems that develop. I've been asked in the last few weeks to address a college group which consisted almost entirely of non-Jews. And I must tell you, what those young people wanted to know was unbelievable. Jews don't know all the things that happened. It's understandable. But non-Jews have an even much more difficult time. And when we have new extreme right or Nazi groups coming into existence in many countries in Europe, and we have some of that here. I saw some statistics on it, they're absolutely shocking. So I think we have to be very much aware of what happened and be prepared to act. Thank you.
Let me tell you that I think anti-Semitism is a virus. It is a virus that can lie dormant for years. It can also be reawakened. And what causes that reawakening of that virus? It is very simple. It's economic instability, depression, unemployment, inflation, and very great inequality in the distribution of income. And so, if you want to prevent a recurrence, don't just say never again, but make sure that the political powers in the world are fully aware of the fact that we need economic stability, we need a high level of employment, and a low level of inflation. Unless these basic conditions are met, I submit to you that virus will come again in probably a different form and maybe in different places.
Truthfully, at this point, it's difficult for me to imagine what I can actually say to you that would give you more than you've already received from the eloquence of those who've preceded me here at the dais. But I would like to be able to share with you just a little bit of a perspective, just a little bit of a witness, perhaps, of how the story of Kristallnacht continues to have an impact on me as a religious leader in our community. I'm thinking about windows. Windows. Ordinary as they are, commonplace as they are, windows are really quite miraculous things. They are walls, really, when you stop to think about it. They are boundaries. But boundaries with the peculiar characteristic of allowing us to see with equal clarity both the cold darkness that resides on one side of the wall and the warmth and light that lives on the other side. But as we also all know, windows are very, very fragile membranes. like pie crust, easily made, more easily broken. One thoughtlessly wielded baseball bat, one carelessly swung hammer, and crash. The street is filled with shattered shards, allowing that cold darkness to rush in and to utterly overwhelm the warmth and the light. On that night, all the streets of Central Europe were suddenly and unexpectedly filled with broken fragments. Broken fragments that became nothing more than a dim memory of what had once been windows. And the cold darkness rushed in, and for a time it seemed as though it would extinguish the light forever. Human memory, of course, is also a kind of window, a transparent wall that allows us to see with clarity, even when we would really rather not see it. It allows us to see with great clarity all the cold darkness of violence and cruelty, wickedness and hatred that the human heart is really, genuinely capable of, while at the very same time showing us with equal clarity the beauty and creativity, the love and the respect that the human spirit may aspire to. And only a thin, fragile membrane, only a thin membrane of memory stands between these two things. One careless moment of forgetfulness, and even here, even now on this night, the streets could be filled all over again with the fragments of one-time windows. And the light might be overcome by the darkness that is always there, just over there, on the other side of that looking glass. So here tonight, for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of our descendants, we choose life. We choose life by putting the window back in its place. Because tonight, sisters and brothers, together, we remember. We remember.
I have been in active ministry for 45 years. This may be one of the most significant moments in that 45 years because of who you are and because you've invited me to be in your company on this night of all nights. In my high school modern history class in the early 1960s, we never discussed the Holocaust, our Kristallnacht. I first learned about the Holocaust by reading the Diary of Anne Frank, as so many teenagers of that era did. And I could not comprehend the evil of the Holocaust. It did not make sense. And why wasn't anyone talking about it? And then the interviews on television and radio with Elie Wiesel, The Sound of Music, a visit to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, time spent in Austria and Germany, the stadium in Berlin, Martin Niemöller's church, Sachsenhausen, a trip to Israel, conversations with friends of the American Jewish Committee, Schindler's List, another trip to Israel, personal testimonies by some of you, Howard Reich's mother, the Holocaust museums in Jerusalem, Washington, D.C., and Skokie, and reading and more reading and much more listening. And after all of that, the Holocaust still does not make sense. But it has changed history. All of history, even my own personal history, and how I understand myself as a Christian. How could this happen? That should be the first line of every confession of every Christian of every time and of every place. But we gather here knowing the answer. Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and people of all faith traditions and no tradition at all. People of every nation and ethnicity know the answer. It appears in one form or another in each of the Holocaust museums. They came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. They came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a Jew. They came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Martin Niemöller, a Christian whose anti-Semitism was too deep-seated to be of any help to the Jews of his day, but whose confession serves as a warning for us all. So never again we speak tonight loudly and courageously for ourselves and for one another and for all the generations that follow. But tonight we must still remember the sound of shattering glass.
It was on that evening of November 9th, 1938, that this tragic story began, and what followed was a long period of unprecedented inhumanity. Reflecting on the experiences of Kristallnacht and the Holocaust as a whole, it is important to be able to make connections to today's political and social issues. While the Holocaust was a result of a certain time and place, the human behavior that fueled such atrocities remains with us today, as evidenced by events all over the world. The experience of Germany and Austria's Jewish communities was the direct result of institutionalized, legislated racism and hatred directed at a minority by its government. It is the responsibility of citizens in a democracy to ensure that the rights of the weakest are protected and that the rights of a minority are never to be put to a popular vote of the majority. Many of today's tragedies are a result of the same mindset, a misguided belief that does not allow for the people of the world to live together peacefully. By presenting this history and reminding the world of what can happen when such ideologies take control, we hope the phrase, "never again," will be heard around the world. And from this tragic event, we must ask ourselves, as a community, as a nation, and as a world, what lessons have we learned? What lessons must we learn?
Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Koleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Chamal aleinu, ve'alol aleinu, ve'tapeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kol tevel, ve'cherev rav, emei aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kol echol tzar, umastin, mei aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chodesh Aleinu, Shana Tova.